Spring practice is here. A-Day is gone. Let's talk about it.
You are Locked On Auburn, your daily podcast on the Auburn Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, welcome on into Locked On Auburn, your daily Auburn Tigers podcast. I'm Lindsay Crosby, filling in for Zach Blackerby, who is still under the weather after their baby came last week, and then he got the flu. Whole lot of stuff going on in the Blackerby household. Very, very happy, lucky to be joined by radio legend, my friend, baseball broadcast partner, Darrell Dapprich. And Dap, spring practice is here. Ton of stuff to get to. I want to talk about some of the injured players, one notable return from the injuries. I want to talk about changing the format of spring practice and the end of it, and getting rid of the A-Day scrimmage that we all knew. But first, I want to get hyped about Hugh Freeze's comments about the wide receiver room. He met with the media after the first practice, which was Tuesday morning. And, obviously had a lot of updates and news and things like that he shared. But I actually clipped the video because he made a really interesting comparison from this wide receiver room to a very notable wide receiver room he had in the past. Let me play you that quick clip.
They better make plays. If that room doesn't have success, we won't have success. But it is one of the more talented rooms I've ever been associated with. And somebody asked me the other day how I would rank that room versus DK Metcalf, A.J. Brown, Van Jefferson, Evan Ingram. I think it's a bit early for me to put all of that on them, but it rivals it. It's close, I think.
Hugh Freeze thinks that Auburn's current wide receiver room rivals the Ole Miss room that had, by my count, 4 different NFL players, and not just NFL players, very, very good NFL players. DK Metcalf, A.J. Brown, Evan Ingram, Van Jefferson. Can we just bug for a minute about how, if you could be 90% of that room, it's the best wide receiver room in the country?
Well, you can even not be as good as that Ole Miss room and still significantly boog. Okay, let's just be honest. I have been booging about this room for about a month and a half. I told Zach on a previous show, I have never been looking forward to and anticipated a particular position group for a particular year more than I am this receiving room for Auburn. And I made the comparison. I think a fair comparison, Lindsay, is not the Metcalf, Ingram, Van Jefferson, A.J. Brown, because that was Auburn may eventually get to that. And Ingram being a tight end in that mix too kind of dilutes a little bit. Right. But make the comparison to the 2004 Auburn receiving room with Courtney Taylor, Devin Arumshadu, and Ben Abamanu. And that was the greatest I've seen in my lifetime at Auburn. And you even had Anthony Mix to throw in the mix. So but this receiving room is nothing wrong with big. I have said that, and it's so good to hear him not shy away from that and to validate that, hey, let's embrace it. Let's own it. This is a room to get excited about that could be historic for Auburn. And again, I don't even need it to be on the same level as that Ole Miss room. It doesn't have to be, and it can still be significantly better than what Auburn's had in a very, very long time. And there's 2 sleepers in that room that he mentioned by name. Lindsay, we always want to talk about Coleman and Singleton and Malcolm Simmons and even Perry Thompson. But the Sam Turner and Horatio Fields reference that he made is not made by accident. It's with purpose. And if you go 6 or 7 deep like that, I'm telling you, I could throw for 300 yards. It would take me 12 games, but I could do it. No, I think that this is a
You couldn't sign papers the next day, but you could.
I could not. I still have a little elbow injury yeah. But I think that this is something that don't shy away from the boog on this. Nothing wrong. I think this room is going to be significantly better than even last year, and it's going to be historically good for Auburn.
Doing the math on those top 3 receivers in 2004, 1,600 yards combined, 17 touchdowns. And Auburn actually had two tight ends, Cooper Wallace and Anthony Mix, that both had 19 catches and right around 300 yards. I mean, one of the more productive receiving groups, I guess you could put it that way. That's not even counting the fact that Ronnie Brown had 300 yards receiving himself.
If you get it back out of that, see, I'm glad. Thank you for pulling up those numbers. And I forgot Mix was so big and added weight, they would use him. They'd flex him as a tight end. Yeah. But Cooper Wallace was a very underrated tight end at Auburn. He really was.
Yeah, I mean, that was a 25 passing or 25 receiving touchdown group right there. And
what did Campbell throw for that year? Did he throw for 3 bills? He had to have.
Campbell had 2,700 yards even.
Wow. Well, yeah, that's because you had one of the greatest backfields in Auburn history you're handing the ball off to.
And Brandon Cox threw for another 300 and something. So it would have been, it was over 3,000 passing yards, but they weren't all Jason Campbell's. Yeah.
Right.
You're in a situation, I'm really curious to see how these guys work. You mentioned, everybody's paying attention to the top of the room, and I'm kind of doing that too with the Cam Coleman and Malcolm Simmons, and like how you integrate all of these guys together, and how I had the list right here, kind of how you use Eric Singleton at the same time as Malcolm Simmons, because they're not the same player, but they have some similarities. And I think it's kind of possible, based on some of what we saw at spring practice on Tuesday, that you can use a lot of these guys almost interchangeably. Like Horatio Fields was 6'2", and he's 6'2", 200 plus pounds, but he was apparently doing a really good job of some of those quick hit, slant over the middle, get open really early in the route kind of things, which you don't always think about your big, tall receivers being the guys doing the short area stuff. You think about them, that's kind of your smaller slot guys like a Malcolm Simmons. There was a play where Singleton came out of the backfield. He lined up in the backfield, and he's just running past dudes. It's fair to say that this is, I think, the best wide receiver room you've had since 2004. And is it the fact that you only have 2 scholarship quarterbacks in spring practice right now? Do you think that means that they get enough time throwing to all of these guys where everybody can be on the same page when the fall gets here? Or is this something where you're still going to have to make sure everybody's up to speed and everybody's still doing the same thing? You'll have that early season kind of awkwardness and feeling out period.
Well, I think the fact that, as Hugh Freeze mentioned, that they have thrown a lot of reps because there's only 2 quarterbacks bodes well for the familiarity. And he mentioned how Jackson Arnold just looks great. Decision-making is great. Deuce Knight is so much further along than he thought. He asked a ton of questions. So Ashton Daniels is there observing. My guy is there, which I'm glad to see, soaking it in.
And to kind of clarify that real quick, he's not officially done with classes at Stanford, so he can't participate in practice. He's not officially enrolled and like a student at Auburn yet. So he can be there. He can observe. He can watch while he does online classes, but he can't actually jump into drills and things like that with the team. So,
and I can relate to him with that. I there's a really a synchronicity. I've had to wait to finish my classes at Stanford many a times too. So I understand what he's going through,
I had to wait to hop on this podcast until I finished my classes at Stanford. So I
get it. So, but I think the Singleton,
I was trying to board a flight once and I had to wait to finish my class so I could board the flight. Sorry, go ahead.
I actually really thought it was interesting when he talked about how Singleton has defensive backs in hell. Basically, what he's been talking about, he said it's just, and then you flex him out of the back, or you have him in the backfield, do that little toss. You know what I'm talking about? They do that toss sweep front of the quarterback when he cuts in front of the quarterback. You just do that. I think it counts as a pass when you do that. So great.
If it goes forward, it does. Yeah, which means if he drops it, it's not a fumble; it's an incomplete pass.
And if he catches it and runs 50 yards for it, you got a 50-yard completion.
You do.
So I'm really, again, the Singleton aspect, the Malcolm Simmons, he said looks completely different. The Horatio Fields comment that you made about a guy that normally high points the football, but putting him in the slot, think about this, Lindsay. At 6'2", 220, you
202.
do 202. You do think about him breaking that initial tackle because of his size.
Yeah.
On a slant, right? He's not as easy to bring down when you're just trying to lay the wood to him and think that a smaller slot guy goes down right away. He breaks that initial tackle, it could be taillights. So that's a nice little feature to have a big receiver in a slot on a slant, getting past the original tackle there. There's going to be a lot of different variations that these receivers are going to be used. And again, I'm not to go back to the same year, the same analogy, when Brandon Jacobs, Trey Smith, Ronnie Brown, and Cadillac Williams were all in the same running back room.
Gross.
I was very excited about that team and that running back room, and that's how excited I am about this receiving group.
That's absolutely absurd. That's absurd, an absurd grouping there.
Yeah.
In just a minute, we're going to get to some of the players who were not in practice, whether it's for injury, other reasons. We'll do that next, right here on Locked On Auburn. But first, today's episode is brought to you by our friends at Game Time. Darrell, can you imagine trying to go see any sort of ticketed event? I don't care if it's a play, if it's an athletic event, a concert, anything, and getting your tickets anywhere other than Game Time?
I'm trying to create the quad because I've bought concert tickets.
Okay.
I've bought Sebastian Maniscalco comedy tickets. Of course, I bought sports tickets.
Yep.
But Zach, I think, used it for the theater, and I haven't bought a theater ticket yet. I'm going to do that this summer, just so when I come on here, I can say I've done all four.
I have the EGOT of Game Time. My wife went to help her friend the New York City Marathon, so they were in New York City for an extended weekend. I bought them theater tickets. They just downloaded them right there in the app. The Game Time people were awesome. I had an issue. They handled it, no problem. If you want to go get the Game Time EGOT, download the Game Time app today. Promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Again, download the Game Time app today. Promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Welcome back to Locked On Auburn. Lindsay, Crosby, Darrell, Dapprich filling in for the ill Zach Blackerby. He's hoping to be back tomorrow, medicine permitting. And just like Zach's hoping to be back, there's a couple guys that Auburn's hoping they can get back at some point in time in spring. They're a little more banged up than usual, right? So 9 players that are either completely out and unavailable, or they are significantly limited. Some of them are just doing individual drills, things like that. On the defensive side, which feels like it's kind of a bigger impact list of guys here. Keldrick Falk is unavailable right now. DeMarcus Riddick is not available for spring practice. Defensive back J.C. Hart and defensive back Champ Anthony. The 4 of those are all out. Falk had a surgery after the season ended, should be back plenty. There's no long-term concerns with any of those guys. And Hugh Freeze's quote here, there are some guys we're depending on. They were going to be without for pretty much all of spring. I wish that wasn't the case, but every year you're going to have these surgeries in January or February from the season, and then you're without those guys. That is what it is, but we'll do the best we can to get them ready when they get back. The offensive side, Connor Liu, your starting center. So that's kind of a big deal. Offensive tackle, Xavier Chaplin. He's going to be your starting left tackle, most likely. Running back, Darrell Robinson. He's not available. Wide receiver, Bryce Kane. It's a hamstring issue. I know that one. And tight end, Hollis Davidson. So obviously it's not a huge deal that these guys are not available now. They all should be back for the fall. But do you think that some of these guys missing, like a Connor Liu or Keldrick Falk, is there an upside here where you can get young guys experience behind them? Or is this really kind of hurt because you need these leaders to be in place to help get the rest of that group in shape before the fall?
There are 2 factions of 2 ways to look at this with the group you just mentioned. There is a certain faction of it's not a big deal and it's beneficial because you're going to get to see some backups emerge. We know what Connor Liu is. We know what Keldrick Falk is. And at some point I did see him going through some drills with Amaris Williams. So maybe an example of what you talked about, just individual drills.
Yeah.
But guys like Chaplin and Darrell Robinson, I mean, Darrell Robinson, I'm really disappointed. I wanted to see what he could do in the spring. He's coming in fighting to go up the pecking order and running backs, with Austin and Cobb, and this ain't going to help. Chaplin, you pencil him in. He's your starting left tackle. But you want to see what he can do. I mean, and then DeMarcus Riddick, who's on that upward trajectory, that's a guy that I think could use more reps and be, that would help. So some of them, it's not a big deal. Some of them, it's non-beneficial for them and the team that they can't be out there in the spring.
DeMarcus Riddick, I think, is the biggest kind of loss there as far as a guy who you wanted to take a bigger role in getting him out there. Apparently, Robert Woodyard has looked awesome. Looked awesome on day one. He's wearing number 0 now. Apparently, he looked fantastic on day one, ranging all over the field, everywhere. But I am going to push back a little bit on the offensive guys. Like, yes, it's great. Like, Chaplin's going to be your left tackle. Connor Lew's going to be your starting center. But offensive line is predicated so much on chemistry that not having those two guys, especially a guy like Lew, who's going to be instrumental in setting your protections and things like that. It's not obviously the end of the world, right? It's not, this isn't going to ruin the season, but it does, I think, put you a little bit behind the 8 ball on the offensive line cohesion as a whole, because the guy calling your protections and setting the offense and your primary pass protector are both not in there. So like the guy in the middle between them, the left guard, is blocking next to 2 guys that ideally he won't be playing next to in the fall. You would like to get them in there at the same time. So that's a bummer. But either way, I do think there is something to the idea of, those guys are going to be starters, right? You lose a little bit of something small there, but those guys are starters. They're going to be quality starters. You're not worried about them missing time. You're really just worried about the impact on the rest of the group around them from them not being there.
Yeah, the chemistry thing for the offensive line is very important, especially when you're starting. I mean, the great thing about Auburn's offensive line is like 7 of the guys that played significant minutes are back next year. But the one guy that you're counting on to be the anchor of your offensive line, I know Connor Lew as a center is probably the most important, but the Chaplin is the guy that probably has the best prospect perspective. You want to left tackle, such a big deal. You're not able to get him in there to kind of gain that chemistry. And you don't remember, we heard so much about Percy Lewis last year, and we thought he was just a plug and play guy. You want to get Chaplin, and I'm not comparing the two, but you want to get him in there. So I would suspect that when fall practice starts in early August, right out of the gate, he'll be ready to go and should get inserted in.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of those things you need to get him, and just getting those reps to him would be great. One addition, a guy who is finally available, who had not been, Alex McPherson. He missed, all of last year with that gastrointestinal issue. He's back to kicking again. He's put on a significant amount of that weight that he lost. Supposedly, Hugh Freeze said that he hit every kick during the special teams period. We're not going to spend too much time talking about a kicker. We're happy that the kid's back. But this feels like, given the struggles you had last year, this might legitimately be as big of a deal as it can be when it comes to a kicker, just having Alex McPherson back in the lineup.
Well, you may be able to utilize him for your 30-yard and in field goals, and then the kid from Southern Miss from any distant field goals. Magoo may kick off. So, I mean, Auburn's not used to having more answers than questions when it comes to field goal kickers. Auburn's been spoiled over the years. And I think McPherson, you've got to bring him back slowly. And a way to do that is to say, hey, 30 yards in, you're our guy, or 35 yards in, you're our guy. The kid, again, from Southern Miss, whose name escapes me, has a little longer range. Maybe he goes from 35 to 50, and then, Magoo kicks off, and that keeps everybody fresh, everybody involved.
Yeah, it's nice to have that. In just a second, let's talk about the fact that A-Day is not going to look the same as it always has. It's completely different starting this year. We'll talk about that next, right here on Locked On Auburn. Final segment of Locked On Auburn here on Wednesday. Lindsay, Crosby, Darrell, Dapprich filling in for the under the weather ill Zach Blackerby. And A-Day, as we know it, is not coming back this year. The team the program put out an announcement on Tuesday morning that it's going to have a, quote, new look in 2025. There is not going to be a televised scrimmage where a score is kept and all of that. That is not going to happen. It's going to look more like a traditional practice. They're going to open the gates at 11 o'clock. This is free, I believe, by the way. Open the gates at 11 o'clock. There'll be an alumni flag football game, a Tiger Walk. They will have a 1-hour practice in the stadium, and then a post-practice fan autograph session on the field immediately after. And then it's going to be carried on the radio, kind of like it always was. SEC Network Plus is going to have a show that'll air later in spring with clips and things like that. But it's not going to be the televised scrimmage that you've always had. Is this good? Is this bad? Does this ultimately not matter for football, but for the fans? What are your thoughts on this, Darrell?
I don't like it. I hate that we're in an era now where you're afraid of people stealing your players because you see them in the spring before the spring portal opens on TV with your A-Day, and that you have to kind of lock that down. I particularly don't like it because there are fans, believe it or not, that the only time they get to see their heroes or the fans or the players that they follow on Auburn because of the price of tickets are those throwaway games against a group of 5 school or a Division I AA school and A-Day. That's it.
Yeah.
They don't have the money to go spend $150 for a family of 4 to go watch an SEC opponent. And it's a time to get over into the stadium, bring your family, enjoy a day at Auburn, go to Tumors, and really
go to baseball. They always have a home game that weekend.
And now you can't. And now it's a glorified practice. I mean, let's be honest. I mean, who gives a crap about going over? If you're a fan, media is different because there's some things you can cover. We cover practices all the time, but as a fan, I don't. There have been a lot of coming out parties at A-Day games where people got a sneak peek of a person that starred for Auburn in the fall, and now that's gone. Yeah. So I get it for the student athlete, for the well-being of Auburn. People don't get hurt this way. Your players don't get stolen. But once again, I think the fan gets screwed in this scenario because there are people that go to a Louisiana Monroe game and an A-Day game, and that's all their experience they get on campus at Auburn.
Yeah. And to clarify for everybody who doesn't necessarily know on the stolen players comment, one of the most common post-spring portal sales pitches is, we saw that you were running with the second team at A-Day, or we saw you were running with the third team at A-Day. We think you could be a starter here. Obviously, they can tell you whatever they want. They get you on campus. You're there for a while. It's hard for you to leave. But that is by far one of the most common sales pitches to a player after an A-Day game or a spring game is, hey, they had you with the 2s and the 3s. We would have you with the starters and the 2s or something like that. And Hugh Freeze actually did address this, and he feels a little bit differently from you, but it's more of a nuanced perspective for Hugh. Here's what he said, quote, "It's why I keep lobbying and will continue to lobby probably until I retire. Do away with spring ball and give us OTAs in June where we can put pads on for like 10 days where you have everybody. I wish we could just train and do individual work that we did like in February. And then us have OTAs in June where you have everybody after the portal and all that. You really have your whole team." So Hugh Freeze isn't saying give me spring practice as it's currently constructed, but get rid of A-Day. He's saying we just have conditioning stuff in the spring. And then we get 2 weeks of pad on practices in June. They get July off. They come back in August and get ready for the season. Is that better, worse? What do you think about that?
As long as they don't play some kind of game in June.
Yeah. Because
you're 2 months closer to the season from an injury standpoint.
I do think injuries is a big part of it too. He did mention somewhere in here. Actually, he did. I just found, if you'll indulge me here, he did mention the injuries playing a part as well. We went down the list of all the injured guys for us. Trying to divide up and have some kind of spring game just doesn't make as much sense as us doing what we did today. We'll have some live periods, but it'll be more of a practice format. And so I think part of that is he does acknowledge the portal's an issue, but part of it too is you have guys hurt, like you're starting centers out. Well, great. Now everybody has to bump up to a higher team. You may not have the same quality of protection behind your starting quarterback now that you would have had, or behind a running back or something. And there's an avenue for a guy to get hurt. I get it. I understand this. I don't love it. I think I'm with you. There's something about the fan experience we need to preserve, and hopefully they have other things planned to try to make that into more of a day for Auburn fans, but it's not the same as a spring game.
The fan day thing happening at 1:30, the glorified scrimmage or practice at noon. They get an hour of practice, they get a half-hour break, and then they go out and meet the fans. I get it, but you could have done a fan day after a day, and I think they did a lot of times.
Yeah,
I don't know. Again, it's the fan aspect of it that bothers me, and I think that if you're going to take away an A-day game, then I would like to see next year one game just earmarked or set aside to go, okay, this
is family game.
We're a family game. We're playing Samford or we're playing whoever. If you bring 4 people, you get 1 ticket free, or you get half off 1 ticket if you buy 3. Something to incent the family to come and have an experience. Your fandom and how you become a fan and then eventually a donor and now a contributor to NIL and on to Victory is based in the evolution of coming to games when you're young.
Yeah.
It's coming to game as a fan. It's learning to love that experience. And you're pricing families out. And it's not like, there is something about being on campus in person for a game and the pageantry of what Auburn does. Look, I get it. You can watch it at ESPN and ESPN Plus and SEC Network, but you can't go through Tiger Walk. You can't watch the Eagle Fly. You can't sing along to Freebird. The night games, you can't go to the light show. All those things matter as an experience for somebody that likes Auburn, not to take away from the football experience, but it is something that kids enjoy, and you grow up on that. You get it passed down to you from your parents and your grandparents. Keep doing what you're doing and pricing families out of it, and you're not going to have that connection anymore.
Yeah, it is a little bit frustrating there. Before we get out of here real quick, Auburn had their pro day. And do you know who one of the best performers was on campus at pro day? And by best performers, I have the numbers here. I mean the third best bench press, the best vertical, the best broad jump, and the best 40-yard dash was?
Jarquez Hunter.
He didn't do a lot of the no, actually. Transfer Wesley Steiner, the linebacker.
Oh, came back on campus.
He came back on campus. He had transferred to Washington State. He came back on campus for this, ran a 4.39. Jarquez did not run the 40 there. Had an 11.3 broad jump, which was the best of all the guys that did the jump. Had a 39-inch vertical, which was the best of all the guys that did the vertical, and had 23 bench press reps behind only Luke Deal, who had 24, and Philip Bleedy, who had 30. If there was an award for the dudes that had the physical talent and just could not, I guess, change direction to save their life.
Or run as fast as you can to a straight line to miss a tackle, there you go.
It's one of those like, oh man, that's the dude. Like, he's going to make a great WWE wrestler in 3 years.
Yeah.
Him and Braun Breaker are going to be a great tag team in like 5 years from now. Okay. Just be watching for that name, Wes Steiner. But my goodness, how frustrating is it to see that performance in a pro day? And it's like, we never saw that on the field, man.
That is frustrating. Very frustrating.
So, Darrell, where can folks go to get more from you and all of your Auburn takes and content and information?
On a few times a week with Zach, Locked On Auburn, wherever you get your podcasts, and on YouTube. Sunday nights at the barn with Kyle Rush, Charlie 5 at 8 o'clock. We go live, and then follow me on X, my social, DAP6410.
I'm on social at Crosby Baseball. It's obviously all my stuff, thebarnauburn.com, the Barn Baseball Show. We're talking a couple times a week. We're to preview Georgia. If you're heading to Atlanta for the Sweet 16, by the way, go to Saturday's game in Athens. It's a mid-afternoon game. It's going to be a lovely day. Go support our friend Brad Law. And also, if you're an Atlanta Braves fan, bravestoday.com. It's the Braves Today podcast. Until next time, this has been Locked On Auburn.